Over 3 decades ago, the late Stephen Covey wrote a book about 7 habits that successful people consistently use. Among these principles is habit 3, putting first things first. The fundamental idea, arguably, it's giving up. The diagram he created to make his point clear was the management matrix. This is a 4-quadrant system to categorize activities in your life. On the x-axis, we have the level of urgency of something, and on the y-axis, we have the level of importance of something. The sidebar shows the amount of input or work you have to put in and the corresponding reward you get. Just like your position on a seesaw, some quadrants will give you more output for your input. In the first quadrant, we see that activities are urgent and important. Covey believed that this quadrant should be close to empty. Things that require immediate attention are important and are undoubtedly a part of life, but too much and it starts to feel like you're fighting fires. Too much time in this square and you will end up stressed and burnt out. Moving downwards, we have activities that are not important but urgent. Activities in this quadrant are usually short-term. This square will leave you helpless and out of control, because while there are many things that demand your attention, none of them contribute to your goals. Next, we have activities that are neither important nor urgent. Although we won't admit it, this quadrant is where a lot of us spend our time. These activities can range from pretending to be working or even relaxing excessively. And finally, we have activities that are important but not urgent. This includes anything from your relationships down to the schedule and vision in your life. Activities in this quadrant often put out exponential output for the amount of input fed in. This last quadrant is like a seed. Although the seed itself is small, the harvest it creates can increase its value exponentially. As you can imagine, putting first things first requires us to live the majority of our lives in this quadrant. At the core of Stephen Covey's diagram is the concept of essentialism, the principle of less but better. In the past, working excessively was for the people of the lower class, and having free time was seen as a sign of success. In the words of Cicero, a Roman statesman and philosopher, a citizen who gives his labor for money degrades himself to the rank of slaves. However, some researchers are noting that the public consensus might be shifting. Brigid, Schulte, an American writer, says that, quote, busyness has become the new badge of honor. In other words, we are starting to live more of our lives in these 2 quadrants. With things like smartphones, media, and television, we are becoming increasingly distracted and new things are constantly demanding our attention. Amongst all these distractions, the Essentialist reminds himself that almost everything is noise, and very few things actually require our attention. Although this principle is known by many names, for this video we're going to call it the law of the vital few. It states that about 80% of the results of something will come from just 20% of its causes. For example, 80% of crimes might be committed by 20% of the people, or 80% of a company's profits might come from just 20% of the customers. The Essentialist, according to Greg McKeown, does 3 things. 1. Explore. 2. Eliminate. And 3. Execute. Firstly, the Essentialist explores what is important. They try to figure out what activities in their life is in that second quadrant. This is similar to the phase where you're exploring how to build a house. It's where you discern what is and is not important. An actionable step here might be to write down some quadrant 2 activities, and how these activities, if done well, will have a significant impact on your life. Secondly, Essentialists eliminate based on their observations. They reject the life of urgency of the first column and pursue less in a more disciplined manner. This is analogous to finding a good place and planning the blueprint for the house. The most important thing in this stage is to not give credence to things distracting you from your goals, choosing to eliminate the trivial many from the vital few. In other words, we're trying to find that 20%. Essentialists cultivate the ability to give up things they want but don't need. Thirdly, Essentialists execute. They start to build the house, understand that they are in control, and choose to get the right things done. Executing the things that are vital can look like working hours on a day to prioritize something you've been putting off, all the way down to strengthening relationships. The Essentialist knows that interdependence, that is, 2 parties mutually depending on each other, is more fruitful than independence alone. These are the 3 simple steps to becoming an Essentialist. But as straightforward as it might be, it is difficult to actualize. The cruel reality is that there are many barriers to becoming an Essentialist. Things like work, family, school, etc. The constant routine and mundanity of daily life keeps us trapped. So how does anyone find time in the everydayness of life? The idea is not to spend a bunch of time in activities that exist in the second quadrant from the beginning. Rather, it is to find the ideal, find where your goals are, and slowly work towards that goal. If in your ideal life you spend 2 hours reading every day, you might start today with just 5, 10, or 15 minutes from the beginning. The core concept to understand here is that you can practice small parts of your ideal life, even in the everydayness of life. However, there is a caveat. For those actions and activities that are within this second quadrant to be fruitful in any way, we must understand and practice working deeply. Deep work is a term coined by Newport in 2016. He defines it as, quote, professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. We learn 3 things when observing activities in this zone of distraction-free concentration. 1, it is valuable. 2, it is rare. And 3, it is meaningful. The good life is the focused life. To become more focused, you want to spend your time cultivating better habits that can aid you in your mental clarity. Things like sleeping and waking up at the same time every day, meditating, journaling, and being present. There are many ways to learn to focus, but one thing to keep in mind is that attention is like an arrow. If you're focusing on something and you hear a loud sound, even if it's for a brief moment, your arrow of attention will register the loud sound. To keep your arrow in only one direction, it is important to have as few distractions as possible when you are working deeply. Another thing to remember is that mental focus often comes from visual focus. That is, the key to focusing on cognitive faculties is to improve visual focus. A good way to train visual focus is by going into nature, preferably in the morning when the sun comes out, and designating a point. Then you set a timer and stare at the designated point. When your eyes start to dart around, you refocus on that single point. This exercise is similar to meditation, but it is specifically for training visual focus. When we are studying and feel like we can't focus, it is often because our eyes are darting around to other things in the room. In other words, our arrow of attention is not pointed towards the subject. So, to recap, living in the second quadrant, being an essentialist, and learning how to work deeply are pillars for living a great life. Enjoying the small things in life, being alive in the moment, cultivating relationships, building careers, and other essential things like taking care of your children, and constantly learning, are often the product of these concepts. Socrates once said that the unexamined life is not worth living. In response to that, Aristotle added that the unplanned life is not worth examining. No action is without sacrifice, and in a world of distraction, we are called to give up what we want in place of what we need. That is what it means to be an essentialist. Have a beautiful day, and see you soon.